Deep in the heart of the Louisiana bayou lies Blackwater Swamp, a place so dark and foreboding that even the bravest locals won't go near it after sunset. Thick, twisted trees draped in Spanish moss lean over still, inky waters that seem to swallow all light. The swamp is a labyrinth of murky channels, hidden pits and tangled undergrowth with shadows that twist into strange shapes under the moonlight. But it's not the treacherous terrain that keeps people away. It's the legend of the Revenant of Blackwater Swamp, a ghost story that has haunted the area for generations. Locals say that once you enter Blackwater Swamp, you don't come out the same if you come out at all. The swamp is cursed, they warn, haunted by something more than a mere ghost. The tale begins in the early 1900s with a man named Isaac Thorne, a recluse who lived deep in the swamp. Isaac was a trapper and hunter, known to be a man of few words and fierce temper. He lived alone in a small, dilapidated cabin built on stilts above the dark waters, a place that could only be reached by boat. Isaac was feared by the townsfolk of Blackwater Hollow. Rumor had it that he dabbled in dark magic and was in league with spirits. Those who crossed him often found their livestock dead or their homes mysteriously burned. The townsfolk gave him a wide berth, but Isaac wasn't the kind to let grudges go easily. And there was one family in particular, the Bannisters, that he despised more than any other. The curse of the Bannisters. The Bannisters were the wealthiest family in Blackwater Hollow, owning most of the land around the swamp. They had tried to buy Isaac's land several times, but he refused, his eyes burning with hatred each time they approached him. When the offers didn't work, they tried intimidation, sending thugs to his cabin to scare him into selling. But Isaac was clever. He knew the swamp like no other and led them into quicksand pits and snake dens, leaving them to crawl back to town, blooded and humiliated. One night, the Bannisters decided they'd had enough. They would take the land by force. They gathered a group of men drunk, angry, and armed and made their way into the swamp. They planned to burn Isaac out of his cabin and drive him away for good. As they approached, the swamp seemed to grow darker, as if the trees themselves were closing in. The only sound was the soft lapping of water against their boats and the distant croaking of frogs. When they reached Isaac's cabin, they found him standing on the porch, holding a lantern. His eyes were cold like the dead, and his face was twisted with rage. He didn't say a word as they demanded he leave, nor did he move when they raised their torches. Instead, he lifted a small, leather-bound book, covered in strange symbols, and began to chant in a language none of them could understand. The wind picked up, swirling around them, and the torches flickered violently. Before the men could react, a great gust of wind swept through the swamp, knocking them off their feet and sending the boats crashing into the trees. The lanterns shattered, igniting the dry brush, and soon the whole area was ablaze. The men scrambled in panic, but the swamp seemed to turn against them. The water churned, thick and black like tar, and the roots of the trees twisted up from the ground, grabbing their legs, pulling them under. The last thing anyone saw of Isaac Thorne was his burning silhouette against the fire, his eyes blazing with a fiery hatred. The birth of the Revenant. The fire raged through the swamp that night, and when it was over, nothing was left of Isaac's cabin but a smoldering ruin. Of the men who went out that night, only one returned, a young boy named Tommy Bannister, the son of the family patriarch. He stumbled back into town, covered in soot, his eyes wide and unseeing. He didn't speak for days, but when he finally did, He could only mutter one word: Revenant. The townsfolk tried to forget what happened, but strange things began to occur in Blackwater Hollow. Livestock disappeared, their carcasses found days later, drained of blood and mutilated. Strange symbols appeared on doors and barns, and the swamp, once just a dangerous place, became something far more sinister. People spoke of a cold wind that would blow and from the swamp, carrying with it a foul stench of decay. They whispered about a dark figure moving among the trees, watching from the shadows a figure with glowing eyes like hot coals. The legend of the Revenant of Blackwater Swamp was born. It was said that Isaac Thorne had returned from the dead, fueled by vengeance. Now revenant a spirit of pure hatred that would never rest. His soul was bound to the swamp, and his anger had tainted the very land. The swamp had become a place of darkness, where the dead could rise, and the living were never truly alone. The disappearances. Over the years, more people vanished near Blackwater Swamp. Hunters, travelers, and even children who wandered to close were never seen again. Those who dared to enter the swamp at night reported hearing a deep, guttural growl, like the sound of something unnatural lurking just beyond the tree line. Others claimed to hear voices, faint whispers calling their names or cries for help from the darkness, only to find nothing there. The bravest or the most foolish would sometimes venture into the swamp, determined to find proof of the revenant, or to lay the spirit to rest. Few returned, and those who did came back changed. They spoke of seeing a figure standing in the fog, a man in ragged clothes, his eyes glowing red, his face twisted into a mask of rage. They described how the swamp seemed to come alive around them, the water bubbling with unseen creatures, the trees groaning and creaking like old bones. One man even claimed he saw his own reflection in the water, staring back at him with Isaac Thorne's eyes. One such explorer was Reverend Whitaker, a man of God who believed he could rid the swamp of its evil. Armed with a cross and holy water, he marched into Blackwater Swamp, reciting prayers and psalms. Hours passed, and when he returned, he was a broken man. His hair had turned white, and he could no longer speak. He would only scribble on pieces of paper, frantic, chaotic writing that said, the eyes are watching." The ritual of the eyes, the most chilling part of the legend, revolves around the ritual of the eyes. According to the story, if you enter the swamp on a moonless night and light a lantern, the revenant will reveal itself. But you must be careful, for it is said that Isaac Thorne will not appear to just anyone, only to those who bear a grudge or harbor deep anger in their hearts. When he appears, his eyes will lock onto yours, and you will be unable to look away. The ritual goes as follows. If you wish to see the revenant, you must bring a piece of something that holds your darkest emotions, a photo, a letter, or an object of betrayal. You light the lantern and whisper your hatred into the night. If the revenant accepts your offering, the swamp will grow silent, and a cold wind will blow. The waters will begin to ripple, and in the distance, you will see him, Isaac Thorne, standing just beneath the surface of the water, staring at you with eyes that burn like fire. Those who have tried the ritual speak of an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling of being watched from all sides. Some have seen Isaac rising from the water, his body black and twisted, his face frozen in an eternal snarl. His eyes bore into theirs, and in that moment, they are shown their own darkness, their regrets, their failures, their worst deeds, until they cannot bear it anymore. The final victim, the last recorded attempt at the ritual, was by a young man named Daniel Prescott, a skeptic who wanted to prove the legend was nothing but a local ghost story. Armed with a camera, he and friends entered the swamp on a moonless night. They laughed off the warnings, even as they saw the distant lights of their lanterns flicker and dim. They found a clearing near the water's edge and set up the ritual, bringing with them an old diary that had belonged to Daniel's late father, a man who had abused him as a child. Daniel lit the lantern and, with a voice full of mockery, whispered his hatred into the night. For a while, nothing happened. The swamp remained silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Then a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees, followed by the distant sound of rushing water. The lantern flickered violently, and a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay. The water began to bubble, and Daniel's bravado vanished. He turned to his friends, but they were frozen in place, their eyes wide with fear. From the dark waters a figure began to rise tall, gaunt, its clothes hanging in tatters. Its face was gaunt, twisted, and its eyes burned with an unnatural light. It was Isaac Thorne, returned from the depths of the swamp, his gaze locked onto Daniel. The young man could not look away. He felt his legs tremble and his breath catch in his throat as the Revenant's eyes bore into him, showing him every painful memory, every regret, every sin. His friends tried to pull him away, but it was too late. Daniel's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed to the ground, convulsing. The last thing his friends saw before they fled was Isaac Thorne's ghostly form sinking back into the black water, his eyes still glowing with rage. The curse lives on. Daniel Prescott never recovered. He was found by a search party 2 days later, babbling incoherently about the eyes and the darkness within. He was committed to an asylum, where he spent the rest of his days staring blankly out of a barred window, whispering to himself. His friends left Blackwater Hollow, unable to escape the terror of what they had witnessed. To this day, the swamp remains a place of fear. Locals speak of strange lights in the distance and voices that call out from the water. Some say they've seen Isaac's glowing eyes staring at them from the tree line, waiting for another soul to challenge the darkness of Blackwater Swamp. So if you ever find yourself near Blackwater Hollow and feel the urge to explore the swamp, heed the warnings of the locals, for once you enter the cursed waters, you may find yourself face to face with the Revenant of Blackwater Swamp, and his eyes will see into the darkest depths of your soul. And in that moment, you will understand why some spirits are never meant to rest.